Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive here on Motivation Library. Today, we're going to be talking about something pretty heady and pretty sensitive. It's healing and rebuilding trust after infidelity.
Yeah, infidelity. Wow, this is a tough one. It really cuts deep. And it's so complicated. The pain that it brings, it really just affects everyone involved, right to their core.
Yeah, it's a big one. And that's why, we really wanted to take a close look at this book after the affair. Healing the Pain and Rebuilding Trust When a Partner Has Been Unfaithful. And this is by Dr. Janis Spring and Michael Spring.
And the author's background here, I think it's really important. Dr. Janis Spring, she is a clinical psychologist, and she's been working with couples for over 20 years now.
Wow.
And she's been helping them deal with exactly this infidelity. And the insights that she brings, they're not just theoretical, They're rooted in real-life experiences. She's heard so many stories from her patients, and that gives her perspective a real weight, a real depth.
For sure. And the fact that she co-authored this book with her husband, Michael, I think that's pretty significant. This wasn't just a clinical study for them, This was something they really poured their hearts into.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, she's talked about how her patients, they were her greatest teachers when it came to understanding this whole thing, how couples can navigate these huge crises, these betrayals, and somehow find a way through it.
Right.
And she always talks about how courageous they were, willing to be so vulnerable with her. And that helped her see the patterns, to really understand what's essential for healing. So this book, it's not just some theory, it's real human experience.
Okay, so let's jump right in. Let's start with that immediate aftermath. Reacting to the affair. I mean, for the person who's been betrayed, those first emotions, that storm, it can be just all-consuming.
Oh, absolutely. It's like the whole world is turned upside down.
Right. And the book emphasizes that these feelings, the hurt, the anger, the confusion, it's all normal. It's a natural reaction to, what is essentially a trauma.
A betrayal, yeah. It's trauma to the relationship. And recognizing that these feelings are normal, that's actually the first step towards, having some compassion for yourself. Because it's easy to, in that moment, feel like you're losing it,
Yeah, totally.
That you're overreacting, but you're not. What you're feeling is real, and it's valid.
Right. And the book does a good job, I think, of showing just how much the hurt partner loses.
Yeah.
It's like their whole foundation is shaken.
Yeah. The authors, they describe it really well. They talk about the loss of the relationship's integrity, of course, but it goes deeper than that. It's the loss of the special feeling you had, this idea that you had this unique bond, this lasting intimacy, and suddenly that's gone.
Poof.
And it's a huge loss of security, of trust.
And it doesn't stop there, right?
Right.
The book talks about this feeling of the world not making sense anymore. Everything you thought was true about your relationship, your life, it's shattered.
Right. And it's like that loss of control, not just over what your partner did, but also over your own emotions. It's really disorienting.
Totally. And then, on a personal level, there's that loss of self-respect that can be so painful.
Yeah.
You start wondering, was I not good enough? Did I miss all the signs? And then, even your sense of self, who you are, that can be fractured too.
It's like you don't even recognize yourself anymore.
Yeah.
Because you're questioning everything you thought you knew about yourself and your judgment. And the book even goes into the physiological changes that can happen. All these emotions, they trigger changes in your nervous system. It's like fight or flight mode, but on overdrive. And they mentioned this psychologist, Abram Gardner, who talked about how trauma, it can disrupt our ability to even act, to function properly. It's a really primal reaction.
Yeah.
So it's not just in your head. This is happening in your body, too.
Yeah. And then it's almost like your body tries to protect itself from all that pain, right?
Yeah.
Because the book also talks about the release of these natural opioids like morphine.
Yeah.
And it can create this weird numbness.
Yeah.
Detachment, like your body trying to shield you from the intensity of it all.
It's like a defense mechanism, right?
Yeah. But it's confusing, too, because you might feel disconnected from your own emotions.
Yeah.
And then there's this, this tendency to almost abandon yourself.
Yeah. It's like you're so desperate to fix things, to get your partner back. You might do things that you never would have imagined yourself doing, things that go against everything you believe in.
Jane's story in the book is a really powerful example of this. So she's dealing with her husband's affair, and it's right after she's recovered from breast cancer.
Yeah.
And what does she do? She decides to have more surgery, more breast surgery.
Oh, wow.
Because she thinks that's going to make her more desirable, more attractive to him.
It's heartbreaking. It shows how desperate you can feel in that moment.
Yeah.
You're just grasping at straws, trying to do anything to fix the situation, even if it means hurting yourself in the process.
Right. And sometimes the reaction is just straight up denial. You get this urge to push away any information that's too painful, even if it's right there in front of you.
Blocking it out.
Yeah, like Betty in the book, she hears these conflicting stories from her husband and the babysitter, but she just chooses to ignore them. It's like the truth is just too much to handle.
And sometimes it is, at least in that moment. It's so overwhelming that your mind just tries to protect itself.
Yeah. And then there's that urge to check up on your partner.
Yeah.
All the time.
Oh, yeah. That constant suspicion, it's hard to resist.
It's like Marge. She becomes a detective, right? Going through his mail, phone records, even hired a private investigator.
It's like you're looking for proof, you know?
No.
But it's also like you're afraid of what you might find.
Yeah, exactly. It's this weird thing where you're seeking reassurance, but you're also chipping away at your own self-respect. It's a vicious cycle.
It really is. You end up feeling worse and worse about yourself, and it doesn't actually bring you any closer to the truth or to healing.
Right. And then you get all these kind of, I guess, coping mechanisms, like smoking, drinking more, shopping sprees.
Distractions.
Yeah. It's like people just trying to fill the void, avoid being alone with their thoughts.
Yeah, it makes sense. You're trying to numb the pain, to escape from it somehow. But as the book points out, true healing, it requires you to slow down, to face the pain, and to really understand what led to the affair.
Right. And for some people, it even shakes their faith.
Yeah.
Like they might even lose trust in their religious leaders or their spiritual guides.
It's like the betrayal. It reaches into every part of your life, even your spirituality. It can be really disorienting.
Yeah. Like Rachel, in the book, she felt abandoned by her rabbi, and that was a huge blow to her faith. She ended up finding a different spiritual path, which is good, but that initial disillusionment, it can be really hard to deal with.
Yeah. And then there's the isolation.
Right.
You feel so alone. You don't know who to talk to.
Yeah. You're afraid of being judged.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the book talks about how important it is to not isolate yourself, to reach out to people you trust, even if it feels hard.
It's important to have that support. And speaking of differences, the book talks about some general gender differences in how people react to infidelity.
Yeah, like women, they tend to lean more towards depression
Right.
and self-blame. They often internalize the reasons for the affair, you know. They question their own worth, like, what did I do wrong?
Yeah.
Men, on the other hand, they're more likely to get angry
Right.
and blame others. It's like a way of deflecting, you know, avoiding those feelings of vulnerability and pain.
Yeah. And even how they understand the affair itself can be different.
Yeah.
Women, they focus more on the emotional betrayal. They often think the affair was about love. And men, they tend to focus more on the sexual aspect. They might feel sexually inadequate.
And that can lead to, you know, jealousy, anger, even aggression.
Right. So let's talk about the unfaithful partner. Their initial response, it's not always just relief, is it?
No, it's complicated.
Like Marty in the book, he was actually relieved when his affair was discovered. He was so tired of the lying.
It was a burden.
Yeah. But that relief, it's often quickly replaced by a ton of anxiety.
Right, because now the consequences are real.
They have to face the hurt they've caused.
Secrecy is gone, and they're in a very vulnerable position.
Yeah. And how do they deal with that anxiety? Well, sometimes they just bury themselves in activity.
Busy, busy, busy.
Anything to avoid facing what happened.
It's a classic distraction tactic.
Totally. And then there's anger.
Oh, yeah. The unfaithful partner gets angry.
And sometimes it's like directed at the hurt partner. Like, how dare you expose me?
Yeah. It's a defense mechanism, right? They're trying to shift the blame to avoid taking responsibility.
Right. And the book lists all these rationalizations that people use.
Oh, yeah. The excuses.
Yeah. Like, I was doing it for the kids. Or monogamy is unnatural. Or even my biological instinct. It's amazing what people come up with.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how our minds work? We're so good at justifying our actions, even when we know they're wrong.
Yeah. And of course, there's guilt.
Yeah.
And grief. Like John in the book, he felt guilty about hurting his lover when he ended the affair.
Yeah.
And he also grieved the loss of that relationship.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
Because there were feelings there.
And then there were concerns about the children.
Right. That's a big one.
Like Bill in the book, he was terrified of traumatizing his son who had already lost his mother.
And Frank, he was worried about repeating his own father's mistakes.
It's like this intergenerational pattern of infidelity.
It shows you how deep this goes. It's not just about one relationship. It's about family history, patterns repeating themselves.
And then there's the potential rejection from your own parents.
Yeah, that feeling of shame.
Like Barry. His mother disowned him after his affair.
It's a lot to carry, the weight of all these expectations, these societal norms.
So the book gives some advice for both partners during this initial stage
What's that?
to seek support from people who aren't personally invested in your decisions.
Yeah. Unbiased support.
Right. Because friends and family, they often have their own opinions and biases.
Yeah, and they might not be the best people to go to for objective advice.
Right. A therapist, a counselor, or a support group, that's probably a better option.
Yeah. A safe space to process all those emotions.
And for the unfaithful partner, there's often this feeling of self-disgust, shame.
Yeah. It's that realization that you've violated your own values, hurt someone you love.
Yeah. Like Joe in the book. He was filled with remorse for how he acted during his wife's illness.
That's a tough one.
Yeah. The book emphasizes the importance of self-reflection for the unfaithful partner. You have to explore those parts of yourself that led to this.
Right. Understand your motivations, your weaknesses.
But, and this is important, the book also says that it's okay to acknowledge how your partner might have contributed to your dissatisfaction.
Yeah. Not to blame them for the affair, but to understand the dynamics of the relationship.
Exactly. Because both people play a role.
And that can help both partners move forward.
And when it comes to justifying the affair, those gender differences pop up again.
What do you mean?
Women, they often say they had feelings for the other person.
Love.
Right. While men are more likely to say it wasn't about love.
More about circumstance?
Yeah, or physical attraction.
It's interesting how differently we interpret these things.
So the book makes this distinction between romantic love and a more committed kind of love.
Mm-hmm.
And it talks about unrequited love, like when someone stays in a relationship, even though they're being mistreated.
Because they have such strong feelings.
Yeah, like Lyndon and Gail in the book. Their stories are heartbreaking.
They show how love can blind you to really unhealthy patterns.
Right. And the book also talks about the way we idealize our partners when we first fall in love.
The honeymoon phase.
Yeah. We see them as perfect. We ignore the flaws.
It's like we're wearing rose-colored glasses.
And the book actually suggests that this idealization might be evolutionary. It helps to bond partners in the early stages.
To raise children.
Right. But it's not meant to last forever.
No.
There's this natural progression. You start with a romantic prelude, then you go through disenchantment, and hopefully you'll reach a more mature kind of love.
One that's based on compromise.
Yeah. Acceptance. And resolving conflicts together.
That disenchantment phase, it's normal. It's part of the journey.
In the book has this line. It says, courtship is a time of maximum human deception.
Ooh, I like that.
It's true, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're so focused on the good stuff that we often miss the red flags.
Yeah. And sometimes, instead of working through that disillusionment with their partner, some people just seek out a new relationship.
To chase that initial high.
Right.
But it's a temporary fix.
It doesn't address the underlying issues.
So for the hurt partner, the book asks some tough questions.
Yeah, like what kind of question?
Like, do you really want me? Or are you attached to the lifestyle, the security, the family unit?
It makes you really examine your motivations.
Yeah. And are my reasons for staying good enough for me? That's a big one.
It's about self-respect.
Yeah. And the book also suggests talking about assumptions about monogamy.
Yeah, like what did you believe about it before the affair?
Right. And what were your motivations for straying?
Understanding those things can help predict whether it might happen again.
And the book gives some warning signs to look out for.
Like what?
Like a history of deception. Or the inability to see your partner as a separate person with their own needs.
Lack of empathy.
Right. And lack of remorse.
Yeah. No taking responsibility.
Those are all red flags.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, the book emphasizes how important it is for the unfaithful partner to listen to the hurt partner's complaints.
Really listen.
Yeah. And to use techniques like mirroring to make sure they feel heard and understood.
That's so important for rebuilding trust.
Yeah. And here's an interesting point. A lot of the changes that the hurt partner asks for, things like better communication, more empathy, more thoughtfulness,
Those are all good things.
they actually make the unfaithful partner a better person overall.
It's not just about appeasing the hurt partner, it's about personal growth.
Exactly. And the book cautions against making promises that are impossible to keep.
Yeah. You have to be realistic.
Right. Like the story of Jay and Joan. They had different ideas about generosity and finances, and it caused a lot of tension.
It's important to be on the same page about those things.
Yeah. And the book also talks about the financial consequences of divorce, especially for women.
Yeah, that's a real concern for a lot of people.
And it addresses the reasons why people stay in unhappy relationships. Fear of being alone, responsibility for your partner, for the kids.
It's understandable. But it's important to consider the long-term impact on everyone.
Yeah. And for the hurt partner, there's this fear that the affair means there was no love.
That's a painful thought,
Yeah. And the urge to retaliate is strong.
to hurt them back.
Yeah. But the book tells the story of Betty, who realized that her husband's infidelity was actually rooted in his fear of intimacy.
Wow.
And that understanding helped her be more patient and empathetic.
It's about looking deeper, understanding the motivations.
Yeah. And the unfaithful partner, they might withdraw affection thinking it's the right thing to do.
Even though they still have feelings.
Right. But the book encourages vulnerability and open sharing of feelings.
It's risky, but it's necessary.
Yeah. And the unfaithful partner might feel pressure to make a decision about the lover.
Right then and there.
Yeah. But the book stresses the importance of making a deliberate, thought-out decision, not an emotional one.
It's about taking your time, thinking things through.
And here's a key takeaway. Most couples who survive infidelity, they start with a lot of ambivalence.
They're not sure if they want to stay together.
Right. But they make a conscious choice to start the healing process. The unfaithful partner ends the affair. The hurt partner invites them back.
It's a leap of faith.
And then they act as if they are certain about this choice, even while they're still working on things.
Yeah. It's about acting your way into a new reality.
Okay, stage 2. Understanding the affair. This is where things shift from blame to understanding shared responsibility.
Okay.
And the book gives examples of common complaints from both sides.
Like what?
Like the hurt partner might say, he's still flirting with other women.
That's tough.
And the unfaithful partner might say, she's become so suspicious and controlling.
It's like a cycle of negativity.
Yeah. And the book then talks about how our early life experiences shape our relationships.
Childhood stuff.
Yeah. It introduces these 7 formative growth experiences.
What are those?
Things like secure attachment to our caregivers, having appropriate boundaries, being able to express our needs, being able to function independently, feeling special and valued, having a realistic self-image, and feeling safe and trusting in relationships.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah. And if we miss out on any of these, it can affect our adult relationships.
In what way?
Like, the hurt partner might be clingy because they didn't have secure attachment as a child.
Makes sense.
And the unfaithful partner might seek independence through secrecy in affairs because they had overly strict boundaries growing up.
Interesting.
The book gives examples like David, who was attracted to needy partners because that's what he's used to from his mother.
Repeating patterns.
Yeah. And Anna, who chose a controlling partner because she wasn't allowed to be independent as a child. And there's this idea of unconsciously manipulating our partners to get those familiar but upsetting responses.
So, like, we're setting ourselves up to fail.
In a way, yeah. Like,
Okay.
if you grew up feeling ignored, you might unconsciously act in ways that make your partner ignore you too.
It's sad but true.
Yeah. And then the book talks about how infidelity in your family can create patterns of betrayal in your own life.
It's like a cycle.
Yeah. Like Lori. Her father left her mother before she was born, and then her own husband left her while she was pregnant.
Oh, that's rough.
Yeah. And Mike, he wrote this really moving letter to his father, trying to understand why he was unfaithful and acknowledging his own struggles with infidelity.
It's like he's trying to break the cycle.
Yeah. So the book encourages couples to talk about their childhood experiences with infidelity.
To understand how it might be affecting their relationship now.
Right. And if there are children involved, the book says it's important to talk to them about the affair honestly.
And to apologize for the hurt caused.
Yeah. And then there's this thing called the flip-flop factor.
What's that?
It's the idea that the things we dislike in our partners are often connected to things we secretly like or envy in them.
Okay.
Like Keith, who valued financial security, and his wife Michelle, who was more spontaneous.
Yeah.
He saw her as irresponsible, but he also secretly admired her freedom.
I see.
And Michelle, she was frustrated by his workaholism, but she also wished she had more balance in her life.
It's like we're attracted to the things we lack in ourselves.
Right. And the book suggests tracing the timeline of major life events that might have contributed to the affair.
Like illness, job loss, becoming a parent.
Right. These things can create stress and vulnerability.
And make someone more likely to stray.
Yeah. Like Barry, who had a heart attack and started reevaluating his life.
A wake-up call.
Yeah. Or Ron, who lost his job and wanted to feel powerful again.
Makes sense.
So the book emphasizes pinpointing the core conflict in the relationship.
Okay.
What are the specific behaviors that are causing pain? And what are the thoughts and beliefs behind those behaviors?
Like peeling back the layers.
Yeah. And then You have to adopt a new attitude, a new perspective.
To make real changes.
Okay, stage 3, rebuilding your relationship. This is where the work begins.
The heavy lifting.
And it starts with rebuilding trust. But the book says there are actually 2 kinds of trust.
Cool.
Yeah. First, there's trust that your partner won't be unfaithful again.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then there's trust that they will address your grievances, that they'll make you feel safe and secure in the relationship.
So it's not just about being faithful, it's about being a good partner.
Right. And the book says that sometimes you have to act in trustworthy ways before you feel those loving feelings again.
Fake it till you make it.
In a way, yeah. It's about creating the conditions for those feelings to come back.
I see.
And the book emphasizes low-cost behaviors.
Like what?
Small things like smiling more, listening attentively, offering little gestures of affection.
Little things can make a big difference.
Yeah. Like Tim and Arlene, they made a list of these behaviors.
A good idea.
Yeah. And the book encourages everyone to do that.
Create your own list.
But the book also says that sometimes low-cost behaviors aren't enough. You need high-cost behaviors too.
Bigger gestures.
Yeah. Like Roy, he transferred most of his assets to his wife Barbara after his affair.
Wow, that's a big one.
Yeah. He needed to show her that he was truly committed to rebuilding their security.
So he put his money where his mouth was.
Exactly. And then there are these cognitive blocks that can sabotage our efforts.
What do you mean?
Like feeling unworthy of asking for what you need.
That's a common one.
Yeah. Or fearing conflict.
Avoiding the tough conversations.
Or expecting your partner to read your mind.
Yeah, that never works.
Or dismissing any act of kindness that isn't spontaneous.
Like it doesn't count unless it's a surprise.
Right. And doubting your partner's sincerity.
Always looking for the catch.
Yeah. And the book debunks all of these.
Good.
It stresses the importance of open communication, self-worth, and giving your partner a chance to prove themselves.
Second chances.
And the book says it's crucial for the hurt partner to express the full extent of their pain.
Let it all out.
Yeah. The unfaithful partner needs to understand the impact of their actions.
You really get.
And the unfaithful partner, they need to voice their own discontent too.
Instead of bottling it up.
Right. Because if you don't talk about it, it can fester and lead to problems later.
It's about open communication.
And the book challenges the idea that admitting your part in the problem makes you weak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, it's empowering.
It shows that you're willing to take responsibility.
And it can create a stronger foundation for the relationship.
And it talks about how we often repeat childhood communication patterns in our adult relationships.
Interesting.
Like Curtis and Alice, they were stuck in this cycle of silence and aggression.
A toxic pattern.
Yeah. But Sarah, she was able to overcome her own tendency toward silence.
She broke the cycle.
Yeah. And the book advises the unfaithful partner to say goodbye to the lover directly.
For real closure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To prevent ambiguity and future conflict.
It's about drawing a line in the sand.
And it says to focus on the needs of your relationship, not the lover.
Right.
And it introduces the crossover technique.
What's that?
It's where each partner tries to see things from the other's perspective.
To walk in their shoes.
Yeah. Like Marcia and Bob, they had this conversation where they really tried to understand each other's pain.
And it helped them connect.
Yeah. And Roberta and Neil, they used this technique to work through their conflict about free time.
So it's about empathy.
Right. Validating your partner's feelings, listening without judgment.
Those are essential skills for any relationship.
And the book talks about how negative messages from childhood can affect our communication.
What a baggage we carry.
Yeah. And it gives some general advice like don't make assumptions about your partner's thoughts.
Yeah.
Be intentional about how you communicate. Make eye contact. Set aside time for important conversations.
Simple but powerful.
Yeah. And it gives examples of requests that you can make of your partner. Things like, tell me when you're feeling insecure, or when we disagree, tell me what you agree with.
Concrete steps.
Yeah. And it all comes down to this.
Mm.
Open communication and physical closeness, those are essential for restoring intimacy.
The foundations.
Right. And then the book gets into rebuilding sexual intimacy, which can be tricky.
For sure.
There are all these assumptions that people have.
Like what?
Like, sex should be natural and easy right away.
It doesn't always work that way.
Right. Or any touching will lead to sex.
Pressure.
Yeah. And the book challenges these assumptions.
Good.
It emphasizes communication, respect for boundaries, and focusing on connection rather than performance.
Taking the pressure off.
Yeah. And for the hurt partner, there's often this fear that they'll never be able to satisfy their partner like the lover did.
Comparison is the thief of joy.
Right. And the book encourages self-compassion and focusing on your own needs.
Not trying to be someone else.
Yeah. And it gives an example of a helpful response to the unfaithful partner's anxieties about sex.
To reassure them.
Yeah. And it also points out how the unfaithful partner might be sabotaging their sex life by making comparisons to the affair partner.
Not helpful.
Or focusing only on sex, not intimacy.
Or not dealing with their own issues.
Right. And those should statements about sex, they're just unrealistic.
They set you up for failure.
Yeah. And the book talks about the dynamic where one partner withholds sex for power and the other feels rejected.
A power struggle.
Yeah. It emphasizes finding a balance and rebuilding intimacy through different forms of connection.
Beyond just sex.
Like Jeff and Leah, they were stuck in that dynamic.
It can be hard to break free.
So the book gives suggestions for reestablishing sexual intimacy. Communicate openly. Respect limits. Find playful ways to initiate.
Taking it slow.
Yeah. And any kind of touching can be intimate at this stage.
Just reconnected physically.
Right. And the book talks about the fear of voicing your sexual desires.
It can be scary to be vulnerable.
But it's so important for intimacy.
It is.
Like Tim and Carol, they were both frustrated because they weren't being honest about what they wanted.
Communication is key.
And then there's Todd and Valerie. They were able to negotiate the frequency of sex by being open about their needs.
Compromise.
Yeah. And the book encourages people to talk about their insecurities and embarrassments about their bodies and sex.
Creating a safe space.
Yeah. And finally, it talks about forgiveness.
A big one.
And it addresses some common misconceptions about forgiveness.
What do you mean?
Like, it doesn't mean replacing negative feelings with positive ones.
Okay.
And it doesn't mean condoning the behavior.
Right.
And it doesn't mean forgetting what happened.
You can forgive someone without condoning their actions.
Yeah. It's about releasing the anger and resentment, not erasing the past.
It's about moving forward.
And the book emphasizes that the unfaithful partner also needs to forgive themselves.